The desperate hunger of the forest was thick and dark, with towering trees that seemed to reach up to the sky. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves as the wind blew through the branches. In the midst of this vast, wild place, two young alien girls sat on the cold ground. Their bodies were weak, their eyes tired and empty. The once bright and lively creatures were now just shadows of their former selves. Fighting for survival, the air was crisp, and a chill had begun to settle over the forest as the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. The girls had been wandering for days without food, their stomachs growling louder with each passing hour. They hadn't had a proper meal in what felt like forever, and their bodies were paying the price. Their skin, once glowing with vibrant colors, was now pale and thin, and their energy was nearly gone. One of the girls, with skin as blue as the sky, glanced at her companion, a girl with pale skin and soft brown hair. Both of them had pointed ears, like no human they had ever seen, and their eyes were large and full of wonder, now dimmed by hunger and exhaustion. "We need food," the blue-skinned girl whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The other girl nodded, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have the strength to speak. They had been alone for too long, separated from their family and their home planet, stranded on Earth with no way to get back. They had tried everything to find food, but the strange plants in the forest weren't edible, and the small animals they tried to catch had all escaped. The hunger had taken its toll, and now even their thoughts were beginning to fade. The blue-skinned girl stood up slowly, her legs trembling with weakness. She had to find something, anything. The silence of the forest seemed to grow heavier. With each step she took, her stomach clenched painfully, but she kept moving forward. The shadows of the trees grew longer, and the ground beneath her feet became colder. But there was no stopping now. She couldn't give up. She couldn't let them die here. She reached for a small plant she had spotted earlier, hoping that it might be something they could eat. But as she bent down, her body swayed. The dizziness was becoming unbearable. She could barely keep her eyes open. With a soft thud, she collapsed to the ground. Her friend, startled by the sound, scrambled to her side. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaky. The blue-skinned girl tried to sit up, but her arms were too weak to support her. "I just need a moment," she mumbled, struggling to keep her eyes open. The other girl looked around, her panic rising. They were alone in this strange world, and there was no one to help them, no one to offer them food or shelter. They were out of options, and the cold night was closing in on them. She could feel it, the darkness of the forest, the stillness, the fear. It was as if the world itself was swallowing them whole. She had to do something. She had to save them both. But what could she do? They were alone. No one had come for them. Not for days. It felt like no one would ever come. Just then, a noise broke the stillness of the forest. It was soft at first, like a distant rustling, but it grew louder, drawing closer. The girls' heads turned in the direction of the sound, their hearts pounding in their chests. The blue-skinned girl's breath quickened, her eyes wide with both fear and hope. Could it be someone? Could it be someone who could help them? The rustling grew louder, and then, from between the trees, a figure appeared. It was a human, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an expression of concern on his face. He looked down at the two girls with a mixture of confusion and sympathy. They stared up at him, too weak to move, too hungry to speak. For a moment, there was only silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. The human man looked at the two strange beings before him, his brow furrowing with concern. "What happened to you two?" he asked, his voice deep and warm. The girls didn't respond. They couldn't. The hunger had drained them completely. All they could do was sit there, too exhausted to even lift their heads. The man knelt down, his gaze softening as he reached out a hand toward the blue-skinned girl. "You're starving," he said, his voice filled with sympathy. "Come with me, I'll help you." The girls looked at each other, then back at the man. He seemed kind, but they were too weak to understand his intentions fully. They had been betrayed before by those they trusted, but something about this man felt different. Maybe he was their last hope. The blue-skinned girl nodded weakly. With his help, she managed to stand up. Together, the man supported both girls as he led them through the dark forest. The forest that had once seemed so threatening now felt like the beginning of something new. For the first time in days, the girls allowed themselves to hope again. Perhaps they were not alone after all. A glimmer of hope. The journey through the forest felt like a dream to the two alien girls. Their legs, once too weak to stand, now moved with the gentle support of the human man. He was careful with them, his hands steady as they walked, ensuring they didn't fall. The cold night air was still around them, but for the first time in days, the girls felt something different. Hope. It was a feeling they hadn't known for so long, but it was slowly beginning to take root as they moved. Deeper into the forest, the human spoke, his voice soft and reassuring. "I live just ahead. It's not much, but it's safe. You'll have food, warmth, and a place to rest." The girls didn't answer. They didn't have the strength to speak. They were so tired, so weak, that the words caught in their throats, but they could feel the kindness in his voice, and it gave them a small sense of comfort. The world around them, once so dark and hostile, was beginning to feel more like a place where they could survive. Could they really trust this man? Could they allow themselves to believe in safety again? The forest began to thin as they approached the human's home. A small, cozy cabin stood at the edge of the trees, its warm light shining through the windows. The gentle flicker of a fire could be seen inside, casting a soft glow on the wooden walls. The smell of something cooking drifted toward them, and the girls' stomachs growled in response. It had been so long since they had smelled real food. Their mouths watered, but they could only manage weak, exhausted smiles. The human opened the door and helped them inside. The warmth of the cabin surrounded them, and the girls couldn't help but close their eyes in relief. The fire crackled in the corner, its heat a welcome contrast to the cold, biting air outside. "Sit down," the human said, guiding them to a small table. "You've been through a lot. Let me get you some food." The blue-skinned girl sat down first, her legs trembling beneath her. She felt the soft chair beneath her, a small comfort after sitting on the cold ground for so long. The other girl joined her, both of them glancing around at the simple but inviting space. There were shelves filled with books, a worn rug on the floor, and a few plants growing in the corners. It wasn't much, but it felt like home to them. Something they had never thought they'd find. The man moved to a nearby counter and began preparing something. He pulled out a small pot and began stirring, the smell of herbs and stew filling the air. The girls watched him, their eyes wide. They hadn't seen anything like this before. There was no such food on their planet. The warmth of the cabin, combined with the sight and smell of food, began to give them the strength they so desperately needed. After a few moments, the man returned with 2 bowls of steaming food. He set one in front of each girl and smiled. Gently, eat. It's not much, but it should help. The girls looked at the bowls before them, their stomachs aching with hunger. They had been so weak, but the sight of food made them feel something they hadn't felt in so long. Hope. Their hands shook as they picked up the spoons, and they started to eat slowly at first, savoring each bite. It was warm and comforting. Unlike anything they had tasted before, the human watched them, a sense of relief on his face. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I'll take care of you both. I won't let anything happen to you." The girls looked at each other. They couldn't believe it. Could it be true? Could this man really want to help them? They had been abandoned and alone for so long that the idea of someone caring for them seemed almost impossible. But here he was, offering them food, warmth, and safety. They had nothing left but trust, and for the first time in days, they allowed themselves to believe that things could get better. After they finished eating, the man stood up. "I've got a spare bed by the fire. You can rest there for the night. I'll keep watch, so you don't have to worry about anything." The girls nodded silently. They didn't speak, but they felt a deep sense of gratitude toward this human who had offered them more than anyone else ever had. The warmth of the fire, the food, the kindness, it was more than they could have hoped for. As they lay down on the soft bed by the fire, they felt a small spark of hope inside them. The night had been long, but for the first time in so long, they felt safe. As they drifted off to sleep, the blue-skinned girl whispered softly, "Thank you, ... The other girl didn't answer, but her tired eyes filled with gratitude. In this strange world, they had found a place where they were no longer alone, and for now, that was enough. The strangers' offer the morning came slowly, with soft rays of sunlight filtering through the windows of the cabin. The warmth of the fire had faded during the night, but the air inside was still comforting, filled with the gentle scent of wood and herbs. The girls woke up, their bodies still tired, but not as weak as before. They stretched carefully, feeling the strength return to their limbs. The human had already risen. He was busy near the stove, preparing something that smelled delicious. The girls glanced at each other, unsure of how to act. Could they trust him? Was this kindness real, or was it all part of a trick? But the blue-skinned girl's stomach growled, loudly, cutting through the silence. She smiled weakly, her eyes embarrassed. She hadn't felt hunger in the same way for a long time. She hadn't realized just how much she had missed the simple comfort of a full stomach. The human turned, noticing their hesitation. He smiled kindly, his eyes gentle. "You can stay here as long as you need. You're safe. I won't turn you away." His words echoed in their minds, comforting them. He had offered them shelter and food the night before, but now there was a new question in their hearts. Could they stay? Could they truly belong in this place with this stranger? The alien girls exchanged a quiet glance. They had been alone for so long, hiding, fearing, never knowing who to trust. Yet there was something about this man that made them feel at peace. His kindness didn't feel forced or fake. It felt real. And, for the first time in what seemed like forever, they didn't feel like they were unwanted. The pale-skinned girl, who had been quiet up until then, finally spoke. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "Why are you helping us?" The human paused, his hand still on the pot. He turned to face them, his expression calm and thoughtful. "I'm not looking for anything in return," he said simply. "I saw you two lost in the forest, hungry, cold, and I knew I had to help. I've been alone for a long time, too, I understand what it's like to need someone." The girls listened, their hearts softening as he spoke. They had always been taught not to trust anyone to isolate, especially in a foreign world where survival was hard. But this human, this stranger, seemed different. He didn't expect anything from them. He wasn't asking for anything in return. The blue-skinned girl looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "From lack of use, we don't know how to repay you." The man smiled warmly. "There's no need for repayment. You're safe here. That's all that matters." The other girl looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. She had always been the more cautious one. She wanted to believe this man, but her heart was still heavy with the memories of their lost home, of the betrayal they had felt before. Would this kindness last, or would they soon be forced to leave again? She didn't want to get hurt again, but as she looked at the human's gentle face, something inside her softened. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally found someone who didn't see them as a burden, someone who truly wanted to help. The human placed a bowl of food in front of each girl. "Eat," he said softly, "and when you're ready, we can talk more. There's plenty of time." The girls ate this time without hesitation. The food was warm and comforting, just what they needed. As they finished, the human stood up and began to prepare the cabin for the day. He didn't push them to talk more than they were ready for. He simply gave them space to breathe, to think. Later, after breakfast, he sat with them by the fire, the three of them now more at ease with one another. "I know you both have been through a lot," the man said gently, "but I want you to know you're not alone anymore. If you need anything at all, just ask." The girls exchanged another glance, this time with something new in their eyes. Hope. It wasn't the wild, desperate hope they had once held on to, but something steadier, something that had begun to take root within them. The blue-skinned girl spoke again, her voice stronger now. We can stay here?" she asked, still unsure but willing to believe. The man nodded. "You can stay as long as you need, and if you want, I'll help you find a way home. We'll figure it out together." The idea of returning to their home world, to the place they had been torn from, stirred something deep inside them. It felt like a distant dream, something they couldn't yet imagine. But for now, the cabin was their home. The fire was warm, and the man was kind. They didn't have to fear anything at this moment. They were safe. The other girl, still unsure, gave a small nod. "Thank you," she said softly. The human smiled at them, the smile of someone who had found peace in helping others. "You're welcome," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "Now, rest. You've been through so much. You deserve it." And so, for the first time in a long while, the girls allowed themselves to feel at peace. They didn't know what the future would hold, but for now, they had found a place to heal, a place where they were no longer starving and alone. Gaining trust, days turned into weeks, and as time passed, the alien girls began to adapt to their new life. The cabin, once a strange and foreign place, now felt like home. The warmth of the fire, the gentle sound of the wind outside, and the comforting presence of the human man gave them a sense of security they hadn't known in a long time. They were no longer starving, and their bodies began to regain their strength. Their eyes, once dull and empty, now sparkled with life again. The blue-skinned girl, whose name was Elara, spent most of her time near the fire, her gaze often drifting out the window to the forest that surrounded them. It was a peaceful place, but the quiet made her mind wander. She often thought about their planet, about the family they had left behind, and whether they would ever return. She missed her home dearly, but something about the humans' kindness made her feel like there was hope here, too. Her companion, the pale-skinned girl named Nyra, had started to speak more. Her voice, once hesitant, now came more easily. She often helped the man with small tasks around the cabin, whether it was chopping wood or sorting through the shelves. The work kept her busy, but it also gave her a sense of purpose. She could feel herself healing, not just from the hunger and exhaustion, but from the loneliness and fear that had plagued her for so long. The human whom they had begun to call. Samuel noticed their quiet moments and the way they seemed to watch him, unsure whether to trust him completely. He understood. They had been through so much, and trust wasn't something that could be given lightly. He had done his best to be patient, offering them food, warmth, and a safe place, but he knew it would take time. They had been hurt before, and that pain couldn't be erased overnight. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Samuel sat with the girls near the fire. The night air was cool, and the crackling of the fire was the only sound that filled the cabin. He turned to them, his expression serious but kind. "You know," Samuel began, "I've been thinking a lot about you too. I want you to know I'm not just going to take care of you until you're well. I'll help you find a way back to your planet, if that's what you want." Elara and Nyra exchanged glances. Elara's heart skipped a beat. The thought of returning home had been on her mind since they arrived on Earth. But could they really go back? Could they ever find a way? Nyra looked at Samuel, her expression guarded. "How do you know how to help us?" she asked, her voice soft, yet filled with uncertainty. "You're a human. You don't know our planet. You don't even know how." "We got here." Samuel nodded, understanding the doubt in her voice. "You're right. I don't know everything, but I'm willing to learn. I can help you find answers. I can help you look for a way back. And in the meantime, you can stay here. You can rest. I'll be here for you." Elara, who had been silent, finally spoke. Her voice was steady, though there was a hint of hope in her tone. "Do you really mean that? You would help us, even if it's dangerous?" Samuel looked at them, his eyes full of sincerity. "Yes, I want to help you. I want to make sure you're safe and that you get the chance to go back home. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise you won't be alone. You don't have to face this alone." The words hung in the air between them, filled with both uncertainty and possibility. Elara felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that clung to the last thread of survival, but the kind that grew slowly, steadily, over time. Maybe this human really could help them. Maybe he could be the one to guide them back to their home. Nyra's eyes softened, and she finally spoke, her voice less guarded than before. "We don't have anywhere else to go. We'll trust you." Samuel smiled, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret it." And just like that, a new bond began to form between them. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Samuel had earned their trust, and the girls had begun to trust him in return. They were still uncertain about the future, but for the first time in a long while, they felt like they had a chance to find a way home, a chance to heal. That night, as they lay in their beds near the fire, Elara thought about everything that had happened since they had arrived on Earth. They had gone from being lost and alone in a strange foreign world to finding someone who cared for them. It was a small beginning, but it was enough. For now, that was all they needed. Unforeseen dangers days passed, and life in the cabin grew more peaceful. The alien girls, Elara and Nyra, slowly started to feel like they belonged in this strange world. Samuel continued to care for them, offering them not just food and shelter, but also warmth and understanding. The healing process, both physical and emotional, was slow, but each day brought them closer to a sense of normalcy. Elara spent more time outside, slowly regaining her strength. She wandered through the surrounding forest, marveling at the plants and animals she had never seen before. Nyra, though still cautious, started to help Samuel with small chores around the cabin. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments, the bond between them growing stronger. Despite the vast, unfamiliar world around them, the cabin felt like a safe haven. But just as they were beginning to settle into their new life, a shadow from their past reappeared. One late afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Elara and Nyra were in the garden, tending to the small patch of herbs Samuel had taught them to grow. The peaceful air was suddenly broken by the sound of distant footsteps. The girls froze, their eyes darting toward the edge of the trees. Their senses, honed from their days of survival, detected the unmistakable presence of others. The hairs on the back of their necks stood up. "Samuel," Elara whispered urgently, but there was no sign of him. He was still inside, tending to the fire. Nyra's voice was tight with fear. "Do you think it's them?" Elara nodded slowly. The girls had been running for so long, always watching their backs, always afraid of being caught. It had been weeks since they'd escaped from the hostile beings who had pursued them on their home planet. They hadn't expected anyone to find them here on Earth. But now, the footsteps were too familiar. It was the same group that had followed them before, the same ones who had tried to capture them. The sound of the footsteps grew louder. The girls backed up into the trees, hiding behind the thick foliage, as their hearts raced in their chests. They had no weapons, no way to defend themselves. All they had was the hope that Samuel would act in time. Just then, they saw movement through the trees. Several figures emerged, their forms tall and intimidating. Elara's heart sank. The hostile beings had found them. She grabbed Nyra's arm. "We need to warn Samuel." But before they could move, one of the figures turned and spotted them. "There they are," the voice rang out, rough and cold. "Capture them." Fear surged through the girls as they turned to run. Their legs, still weak from their time in the forest, felt as if they were made of stone. The figures began to chase them, their long strides easily outpacing the girls. Elara's breath came in quick gasps. They couldn't outrun them, not like this. They had nowhere to go, no place to hide. "Samuel," Elara cried out, hoping against hope that he would hear them. She could only hope he was close enough to help. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shook as heavy footsteps pounded the earth. The figures were closing in fast. Elara's heart skipped a beat. She looked behind her, desperate for a way out. But it was too late. The pursuers were almost upon them. Just when they thought all hope was lost, a loud crack echoed through the air. A thick tree branch broke free from the nearby forest, falling with a powerful thud and blocking the path of their pursuers. From behind them, they heard a shout. "Stay behind me." Samuel's voice rang out, fierce and determined. The girls turned to see him standing in front of them, his posture strong and protective. He was holding a large branch in his hands, ready to defend them. His eyes were filled with determination, and there was no hesitation in his stance. "You're not taking them," he said firmly, his voice unwavering. The hostile figures hesitated for a moment, sizing him up. They clearly hadn't expected a human to stand in their way. One of them, the leader, snarled in frustration. "This isn't over," the leader growled. "We'll find them. You can't protect them forever." With that, the group turned and disappeared into the forest, vanishing into the shadows. Samuel didn't move, his eyes scanning the trees, ensuring they were gone. After a long moment, he finally lowered the branch. The girls stood frozen behind him, their hearts pounding. "You're safe now," Samuel said softly, turning to face them. "But you're right. We need to leave here. We can't stay in one place for too long." Elara's voice was shaky, but it was filled with gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you for saving us." Samuel gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're not alone anymore. I won't let anything happen to you." The girls, still in shock from the close call, nodded. The fear they had carried for so long returned, stronger now than ever. They had been given a second chance, but the danger was far from over. The hostile beings would keep coming for them. Samuel's protection had given them hope, but the truth was clear. They couldn't stay here. They had to keep moving. As the sun set and the shadows lengthened, Samuel led them back into the cabin. It was clear that this was no longer just about survival. This was about something bigger journey they had to complete together. But one thing was certain. The road ahead would not be easy, and the girls knew that the worst was yet to come. The humans resolved the night was heavy with uncertainty. Samuel sat in front of the fire, the flames flickering as shadows danced across the cabin walls. Elara and Nyra sat by the window, watching the dark forest outside, their minds racing with what had just happened. The threat they had been running from was real. It wasn't just a bad memory. It had come for them once again, and it would likely come again. The girls had always known they weren't safe. Their home planet, their peaceful lives, it had all been torn away from them in an instant. And now, Earth, which had seemed like a refuge, was just another battleground. Their pursuers would not stop until they found them, and Elara feared the worst. They would drag them back to face a fate worse than death. Samuel had already promised to help them, to protect them. But now, after the attack, Elara couldn't help but feel a deep, aching fear in her chest. She looked over at Nyra, who was sitting silently by the fire, her face unreadable. The other girl's eyes were tired, and there was a flicker of fear hiding behind her otherwise calm expression. Nyra had always been the more cautious one, the one who had trouble trusting people, even Samuel. But now, Elara saw the cracks in her composure. "We have to leave," Elara said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, filled with urgency. "We can't stay here any longer. They'll find us." Nyra turned to her, her face conflicted. "And where would we go, Elara? The forest, the city. We don't know anything about Earth. We don't even know if there's anyone who could help us." "I don't know," Elara admitted, her voice shaky. "But I know staying here isn't an option. We've already risked too much." Samuel, who had been quietly watching the girls, stood up. He walked over to them, his eyes steady and firm. "You don't have to leave," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'm not letting them take you. I won't let them hurt you." Elara and Nyra both looked at him, startled by his resolve. The human's face was determined, a look that showed no sign of fear. In that moment, something inside the girls shifted. They had never expected someone like Samuel to care so much. He was their protector, their safe place, but now he was making it clear that he was willing to stand up to anything that threatened them, even if it meant putting himself at risk. "You've already done so much for us," Nyra whispered. "We can't ask you to fight for us." Samuel shook his head. "You didn't ask, and I'm not going to stop. If we leave this cabin, we need to be prepared. I've lived out here long enough to know how to survive in this wilderness. We'll move carefully, and I'll protect you, but we can't wait. We need to act." Elara looked at him, feeling a mix of gratitude and guilt. Samuel was not just offering them safety, he was offering them his life, his protection, and everything. It was more than she could have ever hoped for. But could she ask him to risk everything? Before she could speak, Samuel continued, "We'll leave tomorrow at dawn. We'll gather what we need, and we'll move quickly. We can't stay here, but we will make it. I won't let them win." Elara felt something in her heart stir. There it was, again hope. Samuel's resolve was contagious. Despite the fear, despite the unknowns, they had a chance. For the first time, she believed they could make it. They could survive. "Thank you," Elara said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "We don't deserve this, but ... thank you." Samuel smiled, his eyes kind but full of purpose. "You do deserve it. You're not alone. None of you are. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow, we move." The girls nodded, still processing the weight of what had just been decided. Samuel's words had filled them with a renewed sense of purpose, but the reality of what lay ahead was still daunting. They were leaving behind the only place that had felt like home since their arrival on Earth, and the journey ahead was uncertain at best. That night, as they lay in their beds, Elara's mind raced. She kept seeing the hostile figures, the ones who had come for them. She could hear their cruel voices in her head, their threats echoing in her thoughts. But she also heard Samuel's voice, steady and sure, telling them that they would survive. He was right, they would survive. Together, the next morning, before the sun even rose, Samuel had packed up what little they could take. Elara and Nyra helped, their hands trembling as they packed their belongings, anything that might help them along the way. Their hearts were heavy with fear, but also with something else, a tiny spark of hope. When everything was ready, Samuel looked at the girls. "Are you ready?" Elara nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes," she said quietly, "let's go." And so, with no other choice, they left the cabin. They stepped out into the world, not knowing what awaited them, but knowing that they had each other. And that was enough. A new beginning. The forest was dense, the trees towering above them like silent guardians. The ground beneath their feet was soft with moss, and the air smelled fresh, like the earth itself was alive. Samuel led the way, his footsteps steady and sure, as Elara and Nyra followed behind, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had just left behind. They had left the cabin, their only safe place, and now they were venturing into the unknown. Elara couldn't stop thinking about the night before, about the moment when Samuel had promised to protect them, no matter the cost. She had seen the fear in his eyes. He was human, and his own safety was just as fragile as theirs. Yet he had chosen to stand by them, to help them in their time of need. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much he had sacrificed for them. It made her heart ache with both gratitude and guilt. They didn't deserve such kindness, but there was no turning back now. The hostile beings, the ones who had hunted them down on their home planet, would stop at nothing to capture them, and, as much as they longed for the peaceful life they had once known, they knew they could never go back. Earth was their new home, at least for now. The journey was slow. They moved through the forest with caution, careful not to leave a trail behind them. Samuel's knowledge of the land was invaluable, guiding them around the dangerous parts of the forest and through hidden paths that only someone with his experience could know. The girls, though still unsure, followed his lead, trusting him more with each step. As the day wore on, the exhaustion from their ordeal began to weigh on them. Their bodies ached, their muscles sore from the long walk, but they pressed on. There were moments when Elara's thoughts wandered back to their home planet, to the family they had lost, and to the life they had been forced to leave behind. She wondered if they would ever see their loved ones again. But as much as the thought pained her, she knew it was a question that couldn't be answered right now. For now, they had to survive. By the time evening came, they had reached a small clearing by a stream. Samuel stopped and turned to face the girls. "We'll make camp here for the night," he said, his voice steady. "We'll need to rest, gather our strength for tomorrow. There's still a long way to go." Elara and Nyra nodded, their tired faces reflecting the same exhaustion that Samuel must have felt. They hadn't spoken much during the day, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding, of shared experiences that needed no words. They helped Samuel gather firewood, and soon a small fire crackled in the center of the clearing. The warmth from the flames was a welcome relief after the chill of the forest. They sat around the fire, the flickering light casting long shadows on the ground as the night settled in. Elara couldn't help but feel a small sense of peace. The fear of being hunted, of always looking over her shoulder, was still there, but it was softer now, buried under a growing sense of hope. They had made it through the first night, and they had Samuel with them. He wasn't just their protector, he was their ally, their friend, and that made all the difference. "We'll make it," Elara said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. Her voice was filled with quiet determination. "We will survive." Nyra, who had been staring into the fire, nodded. "We have, too, for ourselves, for everything we've lost." Samuel glanced at them, his expression unreadable. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Pride, perhaps, or maybe just a quiet understanding of what they had all been through. "You will survive," Samuel said. His voice was full of conviction, "and I will make sure of it." The three of them sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly as the stars twinkled above. Elara looked up at the sky, the vastness of it both humbling and reassuring. They were far from home, far from everything they had once known. But they had found something far more important, each other. Tomorrow, the journey would continue. They still didn't know what the future held. The dangers were still out there, waiting. But in that moment, as they sat together by the fire, there was a quiet peace. They weren't alone anymore, and for the first time in a long time, Allah believed it. They would make it. They would find a way to live again.